In the beginning, before the maps were drawn, before ships dared the unknown waters, before the whispers of gold reached the courts of Europe, there was only the river vast, winding, eternal, the Amazon, a serpent of water curling through the heart of a continent, its body fed by thousands of tributaries, its breath rising in mists that nourished forests without end, its voice a roar that could be heard in the silence of night, its presence a mystery so deep that those who first gazed upon it believed it was not a river at all but an ocean hidden within the land. To stand before the Amazon is to feel small, for it stretches wider than horizons, carrying more water than any other river in the world, its current swift, its depths unknowable, its banks swallowed in green walls of vegetation, vines coiling like serpents, trees rising like towers, flowers bursting in colors that seem almost unearthly. Yet beneath this grandeur lies silence, silence not of absence, but of presence, filled with the cries of unseen birds, the rustle of hidden creatures, the heartbeat of the earth itself. The people who lived along its banks for millennia told stories of its birth, of great serpents that carved its path, of sky gods who spilled rivers from overturned jars, of the mother spirit who wove the forest as her robe, and the river as her hair, of creatures who swam in its depths unseen, guardians of life and death. They knew that the river was not water alone, but a living being, breathing, dreaming, eternal. Imagine traveling upon it in a small canoe, the current carrying you forward, the forest pressing close upon both sides, branches leaning over like hands reaching, shadows shifting, the air thick with heat and mist, the cries of monkeys echoing in the canopy, the sudden splash of unseen creatures breaking the surface, the sense that every inch of this place is alive, watching, remembering. For centuries, the Amazon remained unknown to the world beyond, hidden like a jewel in endless green, its stories carried only by those who lived within its embrace. But whispers began to escape, carried across mountains, across oceans, until, eventually, the river became a legend, and the legend became a destination. The first Europeans who saw it, men led by Francisco de Orellana in the 16th century, believed they had entered a realm of endless abundance and endless danger. They rowed their fragile boats through currents stronger than their strength, gazed upon forests denser than their imagination, fought hunger, storms, and creatures they had never seen before, and they gave the river its name, for they claimed to have fought warrior women along its banks, fierce and tall, armed with bows, like the Amazons of Greek myth, and so the great river was christened the Amazon, a name of myth laid upon a landscape of reality. Yet even before their arrival, myths had already taken root, stories of cities of gold hidden in the forest, of shining temples swallowed by vines, of kings bathed in dust of gold who vanished into the depths of the jungle. To gaze upon the river was to believe in miracles, to sense that somewhere within the endless green there must be secret cities of light, treasures beyond imagination, gods who walked among men. The river became both a promise and a warning. It gave life, yet it demanded respect, for those who entered without reverence often never returned. Imagine the explorer's fear as storms ripped across the waters, as mosquitoes clouded their vision, as hunger gnawed at their bodies, as the endless sameness of the forest pressed upon their minds. Yet even in despair, they could not turn back, for the river pulled them onward, deeper into mystery, deeper into dreams. The tribes who watched them pass from the shadows of the forest knew their folly, for the jungle was not to be conquered, but to be lived with, its secrets not seized but shared. In the evenings, when the forest glowed with fireflies and the stars blazed above in uncountable numbers, the elders told stories of cities swallowed by the jungle, of rivers that hid, temples beneath their waters, of stones that sang when struck, of El Dorado, the golden one, who bathed in sacred lakes, whose bodies shone like the sun. To the listeners, these stories were truths woven into myth, not maps, but meanings, not directions, but lessons. To the foreigners, they were promises of wealth, of kingdoms waiting to be claimed. Thus began the dual nature of the Amazon. To its people, it was spirit. To outsiders, it was treasure. The river itself remained unchanged, flowing eternal, its waters glistening in sunlight, its depths hiding mysteries still unseen, its voice whispering to all who dared to listen. To sit upon its bank at dawn is to feel eternity, the mist rising in veils, the forest awakening with cries, the water flowing without end, a mirror of the sky. In that moment, you realize that this is not a place to conquer but a place to revere. that the Amazon is not a road to El Dorado, but El Dorado itself, a treasure, not of gold, but of life, vast and infinite. And as you drift into rest, let the river's vision carry you, endless waters curling like serpents through the heart of the world, forests rising like cathedrals, myths whispered by winds, secrets guarded by shadows, the Amazon eternal, a mystery, not to be solved but to be embraced, a river of dreams flowing through the soul of time itself. In the heart of South America, where forests stretch without end and rivers coil like serpents of glass, there arose a story that would travel farther than the birds, farther than the clouds, a story that would ignite the imagination of kings and conquistadors, dreamers and wanderers, a story of a man who was not merely a man but a god bathed in gold, a king whose body shone brighter than the sun, a figure who emerged from ritual and myth to become one of the most enduring legends in human history. El Dorado, the Golden One. To understand how this legend was born, one must sit beside the sacred waters of Lake Guatavita, in the highlands of Colombia, where the Muisca people lived in harmony with mountains and rivers, their world woven from threads of ritual and reverence. For them, gold was not wealth to be hoarded, nor treasure to be flaunted, but a gift from the gods, a sacred metal that captured the essence of the sun, that shimmered as if alive, that connected the mortal world to the divine. In their ceremonies, gold was not worn but offered, not kept but given back, a luminous language between humans and the spirits. Imagine the dawn on the day of the coronation of a new chief, the lake still and silent, the mountains rising like guardians, the air cool and filled with expectation. The people gather along the shores, thousands in number, their faces painted, their bodies adorned with feathers, shells, and jewels, their voices humming with chants that rise and fall like waves. At the center, a raft made of reeds glides upon the water, carrying the new ruler, his body naked save for the dust of gold that covers him from head to toe, each particle catching the first light of the sun, making him glow as if he were no longer mortal but the very embodiment of light itself. Priests surround him, carrying offerings of emeralds, gold figures, sacred ornaments, which they cast into the lake as prayers, as gifts to the gods beneath the waters. The crowd watches in reverence, their chants rising, the sound of flutes and drums echoing across the water. The golden man shining like a star upon the raft. Then he descends into the lake, immersing himself fully, washing away the gold, becoming both cleansed and consecrated, his body reborn, his spirit aligned with the divine. When he emerges, he is no longer only a man but a ruler sanctified. The golden dust left upon the waters, shimmering in the sun, the lake itself glowing like liquid fire. To the Muisca, this ritual was sacred, an act of reciprocity, a promise to the gods that what was taken would always be returned. To outsiders who heard whispers of it, it became something else entirely, a story of wealth beyond measure, a city of gold, a kingdom overflowing with treasures. The Spaniards, who marched into South America in the 16th century, heard fragments of these tales from indigenous peoples and wove them into dreams far larger than reality. They spoke of a king who was always covered in gold, of lakes whose depths overflowed with treasures, of cities whose walls gleamed like the sun. El Dorado, once a man, became a city, then a kingdom, then an entire realm hidden somewhere in the green abyss of the Amazon. The myth expanded with every retelling, fed by the hunger of those who longed for riches, until it became an obsession that drove expeditions into the heart of darkness, into jungles where death awaited, into rivers that swallowed men, into forests that erased footsteps. But pause for a moment and return to the lake itself, to the quiet truth at its heart. The Golden Man was never about wealth but about sacredness, about the relationship between humans and the divine, about offering, about humility before the cosmos. The Spaniards, blinded by their lust for gold, could not see this truth, could not hear the language of ritual, could not feel the rhythm of reverence. They saw only glitter and imagined thrones. And so El Dorado became both a dream and a curse, a story that would lure countless men to their deaths, that would shape centuries of exploration, that would become a mirror reflecting humanity's deepest desires and follies. Imagine the first time the story reached the Spanish court, a conquistador, gaunt and ragged from months in the jungle, recounting before nobles the vision of a golden king who vanished into a sacred lake. Gasps filled the hall, eyes glittered, maps were spread, ships were ordered, expeditions planned. Gold, the metal of the sun, the metal of eternity, seemed within reach. The myth burned like fire, spreading from Spain to Portugal, to England, to all of Europe. Each nation dreaming of being the one to find it, each adventurer believing himself chosen by fate, yet the forest had its own will, and it guarded its secrets fiercely. El Dorado remained elusive, shimmering always on the horizon but never at hand, a dream that beckoned but never yielded. Still the story grew, feeding itself, carried across oceans, carved into chronicles, painted into imagination. To this day, El Dorado lives, not as a city found but as a city dreamed, a reminder that myths are stronger than facts, that stories are treasures of their own, that gold itself is but a shadow of the human longing for the divine. And as you drift into rest, let this vision cradle you, a golden man standing upon a raft at dawn, his body shining brighter than the sun, the lake glowing with emeralds and gold cast into its depths, the people chanting, the mountains watching, the sacred act of giving shimmering across waters, a moment of light that became a legend that became a dream that became El Dorado, eternal, elusive, forever shining in the mists of the Amazon and the imagination of humankind. In the restless century, when sails of Spain spread across oceans and empires rose upon the backs of conquest, there came whispers of a land deeper than imagination, of a river that seemed like an ocean, of a kingdom hidden in the green heart of the world where gold lay upon the earth like fallen sunlight. And those whispers drew conquistadors like moths to flame, their eyes glittering with hunger, their hearts hardened by ambition, their minds consumed by the dream of El Dorado. Among them was Francisco de Orellana, who in 1541 set forth from the Andes with Gonzalo Pizarro on an expedition meant to carve wealth from wilderness, an expedition that began with hope but soon collapsed into desperation. Imagine the march, hundreds of men, armored in steel, their boots sinking into mud, their horses floundering in swamps, their supplies dwindling as they cut through forests so thick the sun could scarcely reach the ground. The insects swarmed endlessly, biting flesh until it bled. The humidity rotted clothes and weapons. Hunger gnawed at stomachs. Fever seized their bodies, and still they pressed forward, driven by the promise of gold somewhere beyond the green curtain. When starvation threatened, Orellana and a handful of men took a boat upon the great river they had stumbled upon, intending to find food and return. But the current was relentless, the river broader and stronger than they had imagined. And as they drifted, they realized it carried them deeper into the unknown. They rode, they drifted, they endured weeks of hunger and despair, until at last, after thousands of miles, they reached the Atlantic Ocean. Having traversed the entire length of the Amazon, the first Europeans ever to do so, Orellana returned to Spain with tales not of golden cities but of fierce warriors, women who fought alongside men with bow and arrow, whom he likened to the Amazons of Greek legend, giving the river its name. His account was filled with wonder, an exaggeration, but it burned like fire in Europe, adding fuel to the myth of El Dorado, convincing many that within the green labyrinth lay kingdoms waiting to be claimed. And so others followed, more ruthless, more desperate, none more infamous than Lope de Agrier, called the Madman of El Dorado. Imagine his eyes burning with obsession, his heart filled not with reverence but with fury, his mind warped by ambition and paranoia. In 1560, he joined an expedition led by Pedro de Ursu, meant to seek out El Dorado along the Orinoco and Amazon rivers. At first, it was, as all such expeditions were, a parade of soldiers, horses, provisions, dreams. But as hunger set in, as storms battered them, as sickness claimed lives, Aguirre turned mutinous. He murdered Ursu, declared himself leader, and in his madness proclaimed himself not servant of Spain but Prince of Peru, vowing to carve his own empire from the jungle, to seize El Dorado not for king or crown but for himself. His men followed, in fear, their loyalty bound by terror, for Aguirre killed any who opposed him, leaving a trail of corpses through the forest. He wrote letters of defiance to King Philip II, calling himself the wrath of God, declaring war against all who stood in his path. But the jungle cared nothing for his fury. The river swallowed his boats, disease thinned his ranks, and when at last he reached Venezuela, hunted by enemies and abandoned by allies, he was killed by his own men, his body hacked apart, his name cursed even by those who once followed. Yet his madness did not kill the myth. On the contrary, it fed it, for chroniclers wrote of his obsession, of the dream that consumed him, of the idea that somewhere, hidden in the endless green, there truly was a city worth madness, worth betrayal, worth death. Imagine the forests, These men saw trees taller than cathedrals, vines twisting like serpents, rivers that spread wider than seas, skies filled with birds of colors never seen in Europe, creatures that glided, slithered, roared. To them it was both paradise and hell, both Eden and Inferno, a land that promised everything and delivered nothing but struggle. And yet they could not turn away, for in their hearts burned the fire of El Dorado. The dream of gold shining beyond the next bend, the next mountain, the next horizon. Some would die nameless in swamps, their bones swallowed by roots. Others would return broken, their tales exaggerated into legend. And still more would come, each believing that they, unlike the others, would succeed. Thus the myth spread, and the river flowed, and the jungle remained, eternal, indifferent, watching as men dreamed and died. To reflect upon Orellana and Aguirre is to see two faces of obsession, one carried by current into history, remembered as a discoverer, the other, consumed by madness, remembered as a warning, yet both were bound by the same river, the same myth, the same hunger for El Dorado. And as you drift into rest, let their story cradle you. Men in armor lost among vines, canoes drifting down endless waters, voices shouting in the dark, dreams burning brighter than reason, the river flowing eternal, the jungle whispering eternal, El Dorado shimmering eternal, never found, always pursued, a mirror of the human heart that longs forever for more than it can hold. In the endless green of the Amazon, where the canopy blocks the sun and rivers twist in silence, the greatest enemy of the conquistadors was not always the arrow or the spear, but the jungle itself, vast and merciless, a living labyrinth that swallowed men whole, tested every heartbeat, broke the body, and unmade the mind. Imagine the march of an expedition, men in armor sweating beneath the weight of steel, their boots sinking into mud that clutched at their legs like hands, their horses stumbling and dying in swamps, their provisions rotting in the humidity, their maps useless against the chaos of rivers that branched and doubled back without end. Hunger gnawed at them until their stomachs twisted in pain, for the jungle offered little. They recognized fruit to bitter, roots to poisonous, waters that carried parasites unseen. Storms would come suddenly, the sky darkening in moments, rains falling with a force that drowned fire, soaked weapons, turned rivers into torrents, and left men shivering in cold even as the air pressed heavy with heat. Insects swarmed in clouds, mosquitoes biting until flesh bubbled with welts, ants marching across bodies in the night, stinging with venom, beetles crawling into wounds to fester, flies laying eggs in sores. Sleep was no refuge for hammocks, rocked beneath buzzing clouds, and the cries of jaguars and howler monkeys echoed through the dark, each sound a reminder that this land was alive, alert, watching. Yet the greatest trials were not only of body, but of mind, for the jungle unravels, certainty, turning time into a blur, paths into circles, reality into hallucination. Men lost track of days, their journals smeared with rain, their minds haunted by the endless sameness of green, the endless noise of insects, the endless weight of despair. Mutinies brewed in silence, fear turned to anger, trust dissolved. Some saw omens in the flight of birds, others visions in the play of light through leaves, others demons in the cries of unseen creatures. Madness crept silently, breaking men more surely than arrows. Imagine a soldier, once proud and armored, reduced to crawling in mud, his face hollow with hunger, his lips cracked, his eyes wide with fear of shadows that might only be trees. Imagine an officer writing letters to his king by the dim light of a fire, his ink mixed with rain, his words pleading for faith though he knows no courier will ever carry them. Imagine men driven to eat leather from their boots, to chew bark, to drink foul water until sickness racks them. And yet, amid this torment, the dream of El Dorado still glimmered, faint and irresistible. Every hardship became proof that they must be near, every suffering a test of worth, every death a sign that the Golden City was just beyond the next bend. The jungle became both tormentor and tempter, offering visions of paradise even as it killed. For some, it was too much. They deserted, vanished into the forest, their fate unknown, perhaps killed by tribes, perhaps swallowed by rivers, perhaps alive still, their descendants hidden in villages deep within the green. For others, the suffering hardened resolve, driving them deeper, their bodies breaking but their will unyielding. And always the jungle watched, indifferent, eternal, a cathedral of trees whose columns rose higher than towers, whose roof was sky and leaves, whose altar was the river itself. The tribes who lived here endured these trials as life, knowing the ways of plants, the paths of animals, the rhythms of floods, the medicines hidden in bark and leaf. To them, the jungle was not enemy but mother, not chaos but home. To the conquistadors, it was a hell they could neither master nor escape, a labyrinth that mocked their ambition. And yet, they pressed on, blinded by the vision of gold, by the promise that somewhere within this living wilderness lay a kingdom that would make their names immortal. The jungle, patient and eternal, whispered its lesson, that those who seek to conquer it will be consumed, that those who walk with reverence may endure. Many did not hear, and they vanished, their bones buried in roots, their names forgotten, their dreams lingering like ghosts upon the river. And as you drift into rest, let this vision carry you, the endless march of men through mud and rain, insects clouding the air, storms tearing the sky, hunger gnawing at their souls, madness whispering in their ears, the jungle surrounding them, vast and eternal, a trial of body and spirit, a reminder that paradise and peril are bound as one, that the forest gives and the forest takes, and that those who walk into its heart must surrender or be lost forever. In the candlelit halls of Europe, where kings and courtiers gathered in chambers thick with incense and ambition, the stories of the New World carried more weight than ships of silver and more fire than sermons. For they were stories not of barren lands or strange beasts, but of cities made of gold, kingdoms gleaming with treasures beyond imagination, and above all, of El Dorado, the golden one whose tale flowed like fire from mouth to mouth, spreading across courts, across nations, across the very fabric of the European imagination, until it became less a story and more a hunger that could not be silenced. Imagine the scene in a Spanish court, a ragged conquistador, gaunt from years in the jungle, his armor rusted, his beard wild, kneeling before the king, his voice trembling as he recounts visions of a golden man covered in shimmering dust, of lakes into which emeralds and gold were poured like rain, of rivers that sparkled with wealth. Gasps rise from the nobles, their jeweled hands tightening on goblets, their eyes wide with desire. The king leans forward, the candlelight gleaming on his crown, and demands maps, details, plans. Scribes bend quickly to ink the tale into parchment. Cartographers stretch lines across oceans, merchants calculate profits, adventurers whisper of glory. Soon the story leaps from Spain to Portugal, to France, to England, each nation feeding it, reshaping it, embellishing it. In taverns and palaces alike, men spoke of El Dorado as if it were destiny, a kingdom waiting to be seized. Gold was no longer enough in coin, it had to be in temples, in walls, in entire cities. To the merchants, El Dorado was a market richer than all others. To the priests, it was a place to convert souls. To the soldiers, it was a campaign that would bring immortality. Ships set sail not for discovery but for destiny, their sails heavy with hope, their decks filled with men convinced they would be the ones to return with riches. The printing press carried the myth farther still. Pamphlets and chronicles spoke of it in vivid detail. Illustrations showed golden kings, temples rising from jungles, mountains shimmering in sunlight. Maps bore the name of El Dorado not in one place but in many, shifting with every rumor, sometimes in Colombia, sometimes in Venezuela, sometimes in Brazil, sometimes deep in the Amazon where no European had yet stepped. The uncertainty only deepened the hunger, for the unknown was the canvas of dreams. Imagine a young noble in England, reading of the Golden City, his mind afire with visions of glory, determined to fund an expedition, to carve his name in history. Imagine a French scholar debating whether the story was allegory or truth, and still urging voyages to prove it. Imagine Portuguese sailors whispering of rivers they had glimpsed, of natives who wore gold ornaments, of mountains that glittered in the distance. For each whisper, the legend grew. For each expedition lost, the myth expanded. For failure only proved to them that El Dorado was hidden more deeply, guarded more fiercely, more precious than they had guessed. The myth spread not only as hope but as obsession, shaping policies, draining treasuries, claiming lives. Families sold land to fund journeys, kings diverted armies to chase phantoms, men abandoned homes to march into jungles where death waited. And always the stories returned, broken men crawling back, their bodies scarred, their eyes haunted, their voices trembling as they spoke of glimpses of gold, of cities that vanished as they approached, of tribes who hinted at kingdoms deeper. Still, the courts listened, the maps shifted, the myth endured. In Europe's cathedrals, gold leaf glittered upon altars, and the priests whispered that somewhere, in the new lands, God had hidden his treasure to test the faithful. In palaces, crowns glittered with jewels, and kings dreamed of thrones carved from golden stone. El Dorado was no longer only a place, it was a fever, a dream of limitless wealth, a mirror of Europe's hunger and ambition. The Amazon, distant and unseen, became in their minds not forest but fortune, not river but road to glory. And yet, beneath the noise of Europe's halls, the true story shimmered quietly. The story of sacred rituals, of offerings given in reverence, of gold as gift, not possession. But that story was drowned by the clamor of ambition, by the pounding of drums calling men to sail, by the rustle of parchment as new expeditions were planned. El Dorado became the fire that burned through centuries, a tale so bright it blinded reason, a dream so radiant it endured failure after failure. For who could give up on a city of gold? And as you drift into rest, let this vision carry you. Kings leaning forward in candlelight, nobles whispering in excitement, ships setting sail under starlit skies, maps shifting with rumor, the myths spreading like wildfire, the golden city shimmering not only in jungles but in minds, not only in rivers but in dreams. El Dorado eternal elusive, calling across oceans, feeding hope and hunger, shaping the destiny of nations with nothing more than a whisper of gold. In the highlands of Colombia, where mist clings to mountains and silence gathers like a cloak, there lies a lake whose waters have held the breath of legends for centuries. A lake that gleams in the morning light like a mirror of the sky, still and perfect, cradled in the arms of green hills, the lake of Guatavita, heart of the Muisca rituals, cradle of the legend of El Dorado. The place where myth and ceremony intertwine so seamlessly that even today its waters shimmer with echoes of gold. Imagine standing upon its shores at dawn, the surface unbroken, veils of mist curling upward, the air crisped with chill, the surrounding peaks shadowed in the first light of sun. Then, a sound rises, the slow beating of drums, low and steady, like the pulse of the earth itself. The people gather, thousands strong, their bodies painted in sacred colors, their garments adorned with feathers that catch the morning breeze. Priests, cloaked in red and white, lead chants that echo across the water, their voices calling to spirits, to ancestors, to gods hidden beneath the lake. At the heart of the ritual, a raft crafted of reeds drifts slowly from the shore, carrying the new chief, the chosen one, the man who would be consecrated in the eyes of the gods. His body is covered in gold dust, every inch of skin glowing in the sun's rising light, transforming him into a being who is no longer mortal but radiant, divine, shimmering like a star upon the earth. Around him stand attendants, holding baskets heavy with emeralds, with golden figures, with ornaments hammered by careful hands. Each piece more than treasure, it is prayer, offering, promise. The crowd watches in reverent silence, their chants softening to whispers, their eyes fixed on the golden man, the raft, the ritual unfolding. At a signal, the attendants begin to cast treasures into the lake, emeralds falling like green fire, gold sinking like captured sunlight, the waters swallowing each gift with ripples that shimmer in the morning. The lake becomes alive with offerings, its surface glowing faintly as if touched by light beneath. Then the golden man himself rises, and in slow reverence, he steps into the water. The cold closes around him, but he does not shiver, for this is not merely immersion, but transformation. As he sinks beneath the surface, the golden dust washes away, drifting in luminous clouds that glow like sunbeams underwater, dissolving into the lake until he emerges again, cleansed, reborn, sanctified, to the Muisca. This was not a coronation, in the sense of kings, but a binding, a covenant between leader and gods, between man and cosmos, a ritual that promised the ruler's soul was aligned with spirit, his heart given not to greed but to duty. For them, gold was sacred, never to be hoarded but to be returned, never to be worn in arrogance but to be given in humility, a bridge of light between earth and sky. Yet to the Spaniards who later heard of these ceremonies, it became something else entirely. To them, it was proof of wealth unimaginable, a king who bathed in gold, a lake whose depths were filled with treasures beyond counting, an entire culture pouring riches into water as if it were They did not see prayer, they saw abundance. They did not hear reverence, they heard promise. And so Guatavita became the spark that fanned El Dorado from man to city, from city to kingdom, from kingdom to endless myth. Imagine the first time a Spaniard stood upon its shores, gazing at the lake, imagining piles of gold beneath its calm waters. They dug, they drained, they clawed at its sides, desperate to uncover treasures, but the earth resisted, collapsing their trenches, swallowing their tools, offering only fragments, never the wealth they imagined. Centuries later, others would try again. British engineers in the 19th century, entrepreneurs in the 20th, each attempting to drain the lake, to seize the riches they believed lay hidden. Each failed, their machines breaking, their fortunes ruined, the lake reclaiming itself. For Guatavita does not yield its heart, and its truth was never treasure but transformation. Yet still, stories clung to it. Even today, when travelers stand upon its rim and gaze down into its still waters, they cannot help but imagine golden dust shimmering beneath, emeralds glinting in the depths, a golden king emerging from ritual. Centuries ago, the lake holds silence, but it is a silence heavy with memory, with myth, with meaning. To sleep beside it is to hear whispers of chants, to see visions of rafts upon water, to feel the glow of gold dissolving into ripples. And as you drift into rest, let this vision cradle you, the mist rising over mountains, the raft drifting slowly, the golden man stepping into sacred waters, the treasure sinking into depths unseen, the people chanting in reverence, the lake glowing like liquid fire. Guatavita eternal, holding both truth and myth, both prayer and promise, both the heart of the Muisca and the dream of El Dorado, a place where the human longing for light touched the stillness of water and became legend forever. In the centuries that followed the first whispers of a golden man at Lake Guatavita, the legend of El Dorado did not fade, but grew restless, slipping from place to place across the maps of explorers, never fixed, never still, a dream that migrated, like a mirage across the vast landscapes of South America, always just beyond reach, always shimmering in the distance. At first, it was the lake itself, where the Spaniards dug and drained, convinced that beneath its waters lay a kingdom of treasure. When the lake resisted them, swallowing their trenches, offering only fragments of gold ornaments, the legend shifted, leaping to the plains of the Andes, where travelers claimed to have heard of cities of gold, hidden high in valleys beyond peaks. Then it moved again, carried on the tongues of guides and captured natives, deeper into the jungles, where rivers coiled endlessly and forests grew thicker than the walls of any fortress. Each failure to find it did not diminish the myth but transformed it. For, in every telling, it became greater, more magnificent, more hidden. To the Spaniards, it was no longer just one city, but perhaps many. No longer one lake, but countless rivers. No longer one ritual, but an entire kingdom devoted to gold. Imagine the map of South America in the 16th and 17th centuries. Vast white spaces where cartographers could only guess, where mountains and rivers were drawn from rumor, where names were scrawled beside dragons and sea monsters, and across those spaces, again and again, the name El Dorado appeared. Sometimes it was near Guatavita, sometimes in the llanos of Venezuela, sometimes in the jungles of Brazil, sometimes far south in the Orinoco Basin, sometimes even as far west as Peru. Each explorer claimed to know its true location, each expedition set out with certainty, each returned broken or never at all. The shifting of the myth mirrored the shifting of hope, for in truth the jungle itself seemed to move, swallowing trails, erasing footsteps, hiding its secrets. What was certain one day was lost, the next what was glimpsed in the distance vanished like smoke when approached. Imagine the soldiers who followed these rumors, hacking through vines, their clothes rotting from rain, their skin blistered by insects, their bodies weakened by fever. Each step forward was not only into the forest but into the unknown, guided only by faith in a dream, by the belief that beyond the next river bend lay streets paved with gold. Yet every bend opened only to more river, more forest, more silence. Still they pressed on, for in their minds the city moved as they moved, always just ahead, always waiting, never gone. Some explorers insisted it was in the mountains, hidden, like Machu Picchu, built upon cliffs that touched the clouds. Others swore it was deep in the floodplains, a city built upon stilts, shining above the waters. Some claimed it was guarded by fierce tribes who killed any who approached. Others whispered it was invisible, veiled by magic, revealed only to the worthy. The more it shifted, the more irresistible it became, for men are drawn not only to treasure, but to mystery, and El Dorado became the ultimate mystery, a story without end. Meanwhile, back in Europe, the shifting map did not diminish faith, but fueled it. For each new location meant new expeditions, new possibilities, new hope. To the kings who funded voyages, the dream was never broken but merely moved. To the soldiers who marched, failure was not defeat but proof that they must seek further. To the storytellers who recorded it, each change added new layers, new colors, new fire. Even today, historians trace the path of the legend like a dance across the continent, moving from Guatavita to the Orinoco, from the Andes to the Amazon, from lake to jungle to river. And still, in the silence of those rivers, in the depths of those forests, the dream lingers. For who can say it was not real in some form? Perhaps there was never a city of gold as Europeans imagined, but perhaps there were great settlements, rich with culture, shimmering with the sacred use of gold, erased not by myth but by time, by disease, by conquest, by forest reclaiming its own. The shifting map is not only a tale of failure, but of persistence, of how hope itself migrates, how dreams refuse to die. To close your eyes and imagine El Dorado is to feel it everywhere, in the rippling waters of Guatavita, in the vast plains, beneath the Andes, in the endless coils of the Amazon, in the mist above unknown rivers. The city may never have been fixed, but in its shifting, it became eternal, not bound to earth but bound to imagination, always waiting, always shining, always calling. And as you drift into rest, let this vision cradle you, the parchment maps, spread across tables, the ink lines stretching into unknown spaces, the name El Dorado written and rewritten, shifting like a star across horizons, the explorers marching into green labyrinths, the jungle swallowing their footsteps, the myth never still, never gone, always alive, always moving, the golden city that exists wherever human longing dares to dream. In the twilight of the 16th century, when Spain's galleons sailed heavy with silver from the mines of Peru and Mexico, when her empire stretched across oceans and cast its shadow across Europe, the English, bold and restless, hungered for a rival prize, a treasure that could break Spanish power, a dream that could lift their own kingdom into the realm of greatness. And into this hunger stepped Sir Walter Raleigh, poet, soldier, courtier, and dreamer, who carried in his heart the flame of El Dorado, believing with all his conviction that in the depths of the Orinoco Basin there lay a city of gold that could alter the fate of nations. Imagine Raleigh, tall and striking, his cloak embroidered, his words flowing with charm, in the court of Queen Elizabeth, speaking not only of voyages and battles but of rivers so vast they dwarfed the Thames, of lands untouched by European hands, of treasures hidden in jungles where the Spanish had failed. He promised that England, if it reached first, could seize El Dorado, not only filling coffers with wealth, but weakening Spain, whose obsession had drained men and fortunes to failure. Elizabeth, fascinated by his vision, granted him favor, and in 1595 Raleigh set sail, his ships bound for the northern coast of South America, his eyes fixed on the mouths of the Orinoco. Imagine his fleet approaching the Guyana coast, the air heavy with salt and humidity, the forests rising like green walls from the shore, the rivers spreading like veins into the interior. Raleigh himself pressed upriver, his men rowing tirelessly against the current, their eyes wide with the sight of a landscape unlike any they had known. The water stretched vast, the forest hummed with unseen life, the sky burst with storms and sudden sun, and always, beneath the hardship, the dream pulsed, the dream of a golden city waiting beyond the horizon. Raleigh recorded what he saw with poetic fervor. He wrote of fertile lands, of rivers wider than imagination, of tribes who spoke of great cities beyond, of mountains gleaming in the distance. He never found El Dorado, yet his words painted it so vividly that when he returned to England, he spoke not as a man who had failed but as a prophet who had glimpsed destiny. His book, The Discovery of the Large, Rich, and Beautiful Empire of Guyana, was filled with descriptions of abundance, of wonders, of hints of gold that seemed more than rumor. England, weary of Spanish dominance, seized upon his tale with fervor. Nobles whispered of investments, merchants dreamed of trade, adventurers imagined glory. The myth of El Dorado leaped from Spanish to English imagination, now colored not by despair but by hope. Raleigh became its herald, its poet, its champion, even as skeptics doubted his claims. Yet the beauty of a myth lies not in fact but in possibility, and Raleigh gave England possibility, gave them a dream to rival Spain's silver. But dreams demand sacrifice, and Raleigh's obsession with El Dorado would lead him into ruin. Years later, under King James, he returned to Guyana, older, desperate to redeem himself, to prove his vision true. His expedition, plagued by disease and conflict, ended in disaster. His son was killed in a skirmish with the Spanish, his men broken, his hopes shattered. When he returned, Spain demanded his death for violating peace, and James, seeking to appease, condemned him. Raleigh, the dreamer of golden cities, the poet of empires, was executed in 1618, his head severed, his vision unfulfilled. Yet his story did not die. His words, his book, his promises lingered, fueling imaginations long after his body was gone. To read Raleigh is to feel the fire of belief, to sense the conviction that El Dorado must exist, to understand how one man's dream could shape the ambitions of nations. Even in failure, his vision gave England courage, gave them a myth of their own, gave them hope that across oceans lay fortunes waiting. And as centuries turned, Raleigh's name remained bound to El Dorado, a reminder that myths endure not because they are found but because they are believed. Imagine him in his final hours.com, upon the scaffold. His mind perhaps drifting back to the Orinoco, to the vast river, to the shimmering mountains, to the dream of gold gleaming just beyond reach. Perhaps in his heart he still believed, for to abandon belief would have been to abandon himself. And so El Dorado lived on, through his words, through his failure, through the English obsession that carried the legend forward, weaving it deeper into the fabric of history. And as you drift into rest, let this vision carry you. Raleigh upon his raft, rowing against the current, his eyes fixed on unseen cities, his voice filled with poetry, his heart burning with hope, the Orinoco stretching vast before him, the forest whispering secrets, the golden dream, shimmering eternal, never found, never lost, always alive in the longing of humankind. In the heart of South America, where the earth gives way to labyrinths of water, the Orinoco flows like a great artery of the continent, wide and restless, stretching through jungles and plains, splitting into countless branches that vanish into forests or merge with other rivers until it becomes impossible to tell where one ends and the other begins. And it was here, along this mighty river, that the legend of El Dorado found one of its strongest homes. For the Orinoco, with its endless horizons and hidden depths, seemed a path carved by destiny itself, a road that might lead to golden kingdoms if only one dared to follow it to its end. Imagine standing upon its banks at dawn, the mist rising in curtains, the water reflecting the first blush of sunlight, the cries of birds echoing across miles of stillness, the air heavy with the scent of wet earth and flowers. The river stretches, so vast that it feels like an ocean, its current slow and majestic, its surface alive with ripples from fish and caimans, its banks crowded with towering trees whose roots drink deeply of its life. To the tribes who lived upon its shores, the Orinoco was not merely water but spirit, ancestor, guardian, and provider. They told stories of how it was born from the tears of gods, how its branching arms were like fingers stretching across the land, how its depths hid beings who guarded treasures, not of metal but of meaning. For them, the river was sacred, its rhythm tied to their own existence. But to the Spaniards and later the English who gazed upon it, it was a road, a pathway, into mystery, a vein that must surely lead to the heart of gold. Expeditions pressed along it, their boats straining against currents, their men fevered and hungry, their eyes always searching the horizon for signs of towers or gleaming walls. They saw strange rock formations and imagined temples. They heard tribal stories and interpreted them as maps. They felt the immensity of the river and believed it must flow from the very heart of El Dorado itself. And the Orinoco, patient and eternal, carried them deeper, showing them beauty and terror in equal measure. Storms would gather suddenly, the sky blackening, lightning splitting the heavens, rain falling with such force it seemed the river itself rose to swallow them. Then, in the next moment, the skies would clear, and rainbows would arch over waters so still they seemed like mirrors. The men rode on, their bodies broken, their minds caught between despair and wonder, and always the story of El Dorado pulled them forward. The Orinoco was not the only river that carried the legend. The Amazon, vast beyond measure, swallowed expeditions whole, its currents sweeping men thousands of miles. its forests pressing so close they seemed to breathe upon the boats. The Rio Negro, the Essequibo, the Madeira, the Tapajos, all became pathways of dreams, each claimed as the road to El Dorado, each filled with their own myths and terrors. Rivers are not roads of stone but of time, shifting, changing, erasing. What is seen one day is gone the next. Islands vanish, banks collapse, channels open where none were before. For explorers, this only deepened the mystery. Perhaps El Dorado was hidden just beyond the next bend, perhaps guarded by waters themselves. They pressed onward, deeper and deeper, until the rivers claimed them, until their bones lay beneath the current, until their names were washed away like footprints in sand. And yet, the rivers also gave visions, shimmering lights upon the surface that seemed like gold beneath, villages that gleamed with ornaments hammered from sacred metal, voices that spoke of cities deeper still. The Orinoco, above all, seemed a threshold, a boundary between what was known and what was dreamed. It split and rejoined, weaving a maze that no map could capture, a mirror of the myth itself, shifting, elusive, never still. To stand upon its bank is to feel possibility, that somewhere, beyond the reach of eyes, a city might shine. To drift upon its waters is to feel eternity, the current carrying not only boats but stories, hopes, dreams. Even today, when satellites have mapped every curve, when engines replace oars, the river still whispers of mystery. Its waters are brown with silt, its banks thick with life, its islands shifting, its voice eternal. El Dorado may never have stood upon its shores, but the Orinoco gave the myth a stage vast enough to live forever. And as you drift into rest, let this vision cradle you. The wide river stretching to the horizon, the mist rising at dawn, the cries of birds in endless forests, the boats drifting with hope and hunger, the mapmakers bending over parchment, tracing its curves as if tracing the veins of a dream, the Orinoco flowing eternal, carrying not only water but legend, not only life but longing. The river itself an El Dorado of imagination, endless, shimmering, alive. In the depths of the green labyrinth, where the canopy weaves its endless roof of leaves and rivers coil like silver serpents, there lived those who did not need maps or myths to know the land, for it was their home, their ancestor, their spirit. Tribes of the Amazon and the Orinoco, keepers of stories older than conquest, guardians of forests older than kingdoms, voices that carried the true rhythm of the earth. And it was from them that whispers of El Dorado first escaped, reshaped by foreign tongues, misunderstood by foreign ears, twisted into hunger when once they were reverence. Imagine sitting at night in a village clearing, the firelight flickering against faces painted with sacred patterns, the drums pulsing softly like the heartbeat of the earth, the elders speaking in low voices as children listen with wide eyes. They tell of a man covered in gold who bathed in sacred waters, not to flaunt wealth but to honor the gods. They tell of lakes that swallowed offerings, not because they held riches but because they held spirits. They tell of temples swallowed by forest, not lost but returned to the embrace of the earth. Their words are not promises of treasure but lessons of respect, reminders that gold is not for greed but for balance, not for hoarding but for giving. Yet when conquistadors arrived, ragged and hungry, demanding to know where the golden cities lay, these stories shifted, filtered through fear and strategy. Some tribes told them of distant kingdoms, pointing deeper into the jungle, sending them away so they would not return to plunder their own lands. Others embroidered the stories, weaving myths of abundance to dazzle or confuse, to protect themselves. And still others spoke with honesty, telling of rituals at Guatavita, of sacred offerings, of treasures meant for gods, not men. But their truth was drowned by the roar of ambition. For Europeans did not hear reverence, they heard only riches. Imagine the frustration of a tribal elder, his voice steady as he explains that gold is sacred, his eyes watching as the foreigners grow restless, their minds already leaping to visions of walls gleaming with sunlight, ignoring his words, twisting them into maps. Imagine the fear of villagers who saw steel weapons, who watched men demand guides, who were forced to lead expeditions deeper into forests they knew would devour them. Many tribes became unwilling participants in the myth, their stories weaponized, their knowledge exploited, yet they also remained its guardians, for the jungle was theirs, and its secrets could not be forced open. They spoke of spirits who protected sacred sites, of rivers that punished arrogance, of mountains that vanished when approached by the unworthy. These tales, too, were dismissed as superstition by foreigners, yet often those who ignored them never returned. For the jungle has its own laws, and the people who knew it best spoke those laws in stories. Among the Caribs, the Arawaks, the Muisca, the Yanomami, the Tucano, each tribe carried its own version, its own thread in the tapestry of myth. Some spoke of shining kingdoms guarded by warriors of light, others of sacred caves filled with offerings, others of a golden man who traveled from village to village teaching balance. To the tribes, these were truths, not of geography but of spirit, reminders of how to live. To the conquistadors, they were maps. And so the myth grew, stretched across rivers and mountains, reshaped with every telling. Yet, the tribes, though scarred by conquest, never lost their role as guardians. Even today, when anthropologists sit in circles and listen, the elders still speak of golden beings, of sacred lakes, of treasures that are not treasures at all but lessons. They remind us that the true El Dorado is not a city of gold but a way of seeing the world, a reverence for balance, for giving, for living with the forest, not against it. To listen to them is to realize how far the conquistadors wandered from the truth, chasing shadows, while the real treasure shimmered quietly in the stories they ignored. And as you drift into rest, let this vision cradle you. The fire crackling in the night, the voices of elders weaving tales like threads of gold, the forest humming in the background, the river flowing just beyond, the children listening with eyes wide, the stories rising like smoke to the stars, eternal, sacred, misunderstood by many, yet kept alive by those who know. The tribes of the Amazon and the Orinoco, guardians of the myth, keepers of the forest, voices of El Dorado, eternal. In the centuries when El Dorado burned brightest in the imagination of kings and adventurers, men set forth again and again into the labyrinth of South America. Driven by hunger so fierce it devoured reason, and in their obsession they turned not only against the forest but against one another, until their expeditions became less journeys of discovery and more descents into madness. Tales of greed, betrayal, and the revenge of the jungle itself. Imagine a column of men setting out from a coastal settlement, soldiers in steel armor, sweating beneath the relentless sun, their helmets gleaming but their eyes already clouded with exhaustion. Priests carrying crosses, murmuring prayers for protection, horses stamping nervously at the edge of the unknown, porters and enslaved guides burdened with supplies, leaders striding ahead with maps in hand that were nothing more than rumors inked upon parchment. They march inland, cutting paths through the green wall of forests, their swords hacking at vines, their boots sinking into mud that clutches like chains. At first, they sing songs of victory, boasting of the glory they will find. But as days turn to weeks, as supplies rot in the humidity, as their bodies weaken from fever, their songs die into silence. Hunger gnaws at them, mosquitoes cloud their vision, storms drench them until their skin peels, and still they press forward. For to turn back would mean shame, ruin, failure. Then suspicion creeps in. Who among them knows the way? Whose story of a golden city can be trusted? Whispers of betrayal grow louder than the cries of monkeys, and soon the expedition fractures. Leaders are accused of lies, guides of treachery, comrades of cowardice. Knives flash in the dark, muskets fire in sudden bursts of anger, and blood stains the jungle floor. Betrayal becomes as constant as rain, mutiny as common as hunger. Some abandon the column, fleeing into the forest, where the trees swallow them forever. Others remain but plot in silence, their loyalty shifting like the rivers they cannot map. And the forest watches, patient, merciless. It offers them fruit that poisons, waters that sicken, insects that infect. It closes paths with sudden floods, breaks their rafts upon hidden rocks, lures them deeper into mazes of branches where the sun never reaches. To those who seek to conquer it, the jungle becomes an enemy, cleverer than any man. Imagine an expedition dwindling from hundreds to dozens, their faces hollow, their eyes wild, their bodies scarred by bites and wounds. They have eaten their horses, then their dogs, then their belts and boots, chewing leather to quiet the agony of emptiness. Fever drives some into delirium. They wander into the trees and are never seen again, or they scream at shadows until silence swallows them. Leaders once proud in armor are reduced to rags, their crowns of ambition shattered by the weight of despair. And yet, Through all this suffering, the dream of El Dorado still glimmers. They whisper to one another in the night that tomorrow they will see the towers, that beyond the next bend in the river lies the city that will justify all pain. Their belief becomes more fevered as their bodies weaken, for to admit it false would be to surrender their souls. Madness takes hold. Some proclaim themselves kings already, promising riches they do not possess. Others turn on their companions, killing for scraps of food or for imagined treachery. Some write journals filled with visions, cities of light, temples gleaming, voices of gods whispering in leaves. To read these journals today is to see not maps but dreams, to glimpse the fragile line between hope and delusion. And always, in the background, the jungle exacts its revenge. The vines reclaim the paths they cut, the rains erase their footprints, the rivers scatter their bones, the tribes watch from the shadows, unseen, their arrows ready if the foreigners grow too bold, for the forest belongs not to ambition, but to those who honor it, and it defends itself against arrogance. These mad expeditions, remembered now in fragments of chronicles, became warnings as much as legends, warnings that gold sought in greed becomes a curse, that betrayal breeds ruin, that the jungle devours those who march with conquest in their hearts. Yet even in failure, their stories fed the fire. Each tale of suffering, of men lost to madness, of armies vanishing into green silence, made El Dorado seem more real. For surely, they thought, no one would endure such torment unless the prize were true. Thus the myth grew even from death, shining brighter as hope dimmed, enduring because it was chased, not because it was found. And as you drift into rest, let this vision cradle you, the ragged column of men staggering through endless green, the mutinous whispers in the night, the flash of betrayal and torchlight, the storms breaking overhead, the rivers sweeping away their rafts, the forests swallowing their bodies, and beyond it all, shimmering like a mirage, the golden city that beckons forever, always ahead, always out of reach, the eternal promise of El Dorado, gleaming in the madness of human desire. In the centuries that followed the age of conquistadors, when empires shifted and the world began to measure itself with compasses and telescopes instead of swords and crosses, the legend of El Dorado did not vanish, but instead transformed, clothed now, not in the fervor of conquest but in the curiosity of science, in the disciplined steps of explorers, scholars, and skeptics who still pressed into the jungles of South America with notebooks instead of banners, with sextants instead of swords, yet who, in their hearts, carried the same question: could there still be truth hidden within the myth of the Golden City? Imagine the 18th century, when Enlightenment thinkers sought to catalog the natural world, when voyages of discovery were not only about treasure but about knowledge. Men like Alexander von Humboldt, who in 1799 journeyed into the Ore Basin, his eyes alight not with hunger for gold but with wonder at the immensity of rivers, the abundance of life, the mysteries of geography. He measured the heights of mountains, traced the courses of streams, recorded the cries of birds, the scent of flowers, the shimmer of insects in the light. Yet even he could not escape the whispers of El Dorado. He listened to the stories of tribes, to the fragments of conquistadors' chronicles, and though he doubted the existence of a city of gold, he acknowledged the richness of cultures, the sacredness of rituals, the possibility that beneath the exaggerations lay truths about great settlements now lost. For the Enlightenment mind, El Dorado shifted from literal to symbolic, from golden walls to golden knowledge, from treasure to understanding. Yet still, expeditions marched. Imagine British engineers in the 19th century lowering pumps into Lake Guatavita, determined to drain its waters, convinced that in its depths lay the wealth of legends. They built trenches, diverted streams, watched the waters fall, and for a moment the lake yielded glimpses of treasure, small golden ornaments, sacred figures, fragments of offerings. But the earth collapsed, the trenches filled, the lake reclaimed itself, and the dream slipped once more beyond reach. Investors lost fortunes, workers their strength, but the legend endured. Others searched along the Orinoco, convinced that Raleigh's visions must hold truth, mapping rivers, noting every hill and village, yet finding only forests, floods, and silence. Scientists debated in journals whether the Muisca rituals were misunderstood accounts of a larger empire, whether diseases had erased civilizations before Europeans could record them, whether gold seen in fragments pointed to a greater whole. Skeptics declared El Dorado a myth born of greed, An illusion, sustained by desperation, yet even skeptics found themselves caught by its allure, for to write of its impossibility was still to write of it, still to keep it alive. Imagine scholars in London or Paris poring over maps, tracing lines across blank spaces, arguing late into the night whether the city was ever real, whether the conquistadors lied or simply dreamed too vividly. Imagine explorers in jungles, writing journals filled not with treasure but with the wonders of orchids, jaguars, anacondas, yet still leaving space to note when a guide spoke of golden kings. For even as science grew, myth refused to die, adapting itself, shifting shape. El Dorado in this age became less a city and more a question. What lies hidden in forests we cannot yet penetrate? What truths have been swallowed by rivers and vines? What civilizations vanished before they could be known? Some came to believe El Dorado was not one city but many networks of settlements across the Amazon, rich in culture, in agriculture, in art, whose memory was preserved in myths of gold. And as archaeologists in later centuries would discover traces of great Amazonian earthworks, vast geoglyphs, hints of once thriving populations, it seemed that perhaps the tribe's stories held truths. After all, truths twisted by European greed but grounded in real grandeur. The 19th century also brought romanticism, and poets and novelists seized upon El Dorado not as fact but as symbol, weaving it into tales of longing, of unreachable perfection, of human desire for more than the world can give. Thus, El Dorado became not only a geographical quest but a metaphorical one, the name invoked for any dream pursued but never attained. And yet, through all this transformation, expeditions continued, men risking health and fortune, driven not only by science or poetry but by the lingering hope that perhaps, just perhaps, the Golden City still waited. Silent, hidden, waiting for the worthy. And as you drift into rest, let this vision cradle you. Humboldt standing upon a riverbank, notebook in hand, his eyes wide with wonder. Engineers digging into Guatavita, their machines groaning as the earth collapses. Scholars, bent over maps in flickering lamplight, arguing about dreams and truths. The jungle humming, eternal, indifferent, its secrets hidden in roots and rivers. The myth of El Dorado alive, not only in greed but in curiosity, not only in conquest but in wonder, a legend reborn in the age of science, eternal in the imagination of humankind. In the endless immensity of the Amazon, where trees rise like towers and rivers stretch wider than seas, where the canopy forms a green sky that has hidden secrets for millennia, there linger traces of civilizations long forgotten, fragments of lives woven into earth and stone, evidence that the forests we see today were not always empty wilderness but landscapes shaped by human hands, places where cities once thrived, where people flourished in numbers far greater than scholars dared imagine. And it is here, in these forgotten worlds, that the legend of El Dorado finds new breath, for perhaps it was not pure invention but memory twisted through time. The echo of greatness swallowed by roots and rivers. Imagine the forest clearing, and beneath the soil, geometric patterns emerge, vast circles and squares, ditches carved with precision, geoglyphs that span hundreds of meters, visible only from above, signs that here once lived organized societies capable of architecture, planning, ceremony. These earthworks, revealed only recently by satellites and deforestation, whisper of civilizations whose names we no longer know, whose temples are gone, whose voices are silent, yet whose presence lingers like ghosts upon the land. Imagine explorers stumbling upon strange mounds rising from the earth, built not by nature but by design, layered with pottery shards, tools, and bones. These are the remains of ancient settlements, places where tens of thousands may have lived, cultivating crops in fertile soils engineered by human hands. For the people of the Amazon once created terra preta, dark, rich earth made by mixing charcoal, pottery fragments, and organic matter, soils so fertile they endure to this day, feeding farmers where natural soil would fail. This was not wilderness, untouched but landscape transformed, a mosaic of villages, fields, and cities spread across thousands of miles, interconnected by rivers that served as roads. The jungle, after conquest and disease, reclaimed them, covering temples with vines, erasing plazas with roots, silencing streets with bird call. But the memory of these cities lingered in indigenous stories, retold as tales of shining kingdoms. golden beings, sacred centers of abundance. When Europeans heard these stories, they imagined gold walls. In truth, the wealth may have been knowledge, harmony, abundance, yet in myth, memory became treasure. Consider the Xingu region, where evidence shows networks of villages arranged in circular patterns, linked by wide roads cut through forests, their layout reflecting cosmological order, their scale rivaling medieval European towns. Imagine walking through these settlements at their height, open plazas filled with ritual, fires glowing at night, voices singing to stars, fields of maize and cassava stretching outward, children laughing by riverbanks, traders paddling canoes laden with pottery, feathers, fish, salt. To the eye of an outsider, this might indeed have seemed a city of wonder, its abundance dazzling, its order extraordinary. To those who lived there, it was life, balanced with forest, respectful of spirits. When disease arrived with Europeans, these societies collapsed, their populations decimated, their structures abandoned, their voices fading. The forest, swift and relentless, reclaimed them, vines swallowing walls, trees sprouting where plazas once lay. And yet, beneath the canopy, the bones of their greatness remained, unseen but not gone. Perhaps the legend of El Dorado is the echo of these civilizations, carried by tribes who remembered, reshaped by foreigners who misunderstood. Perhaps the golden cities were not fantasies but memories of abundance, reimagined in glitter. Even today, archaeologists uncover fragments, shards of pottery decorated with intricate designs, stone axes worn by use, burial mounds filled with artifacts, geoglyphs, carved with meaning we have yet to decipher. Each discovery adds weight to the possibility that the Amazon was once a garden of civilizations, rich and vibrant, whose loss was so great it became myth. Imagine standing in a clearing where satellite images reveal hidden circles, feeling the silence heavy, knowing that beneath your feet lie the remnants of lives forgotten, that the ground itself holds stories waiting to be told. Imagine hearing the wind rustle through trees and wondering if it carries echoes of chants, of drums, of laughter. The forest is not empty, it is layered with memory. And in that memory lies perhaps the true El Dorado, not of gold but of people, not of treasure but of thriving cultures, whose brilliance was swallowed by time. To dream of El Dorado, then, is to dream of what once was, of civilizations hidden beneath leaves, of knowledge waiting to be uncovered, of abundance that can return, if we learn to see the forest not as obstacle but as partner. And as you drift into rest, let this vision cradle you. Vast geoglyphs, etched in earth-like whispers to the sky, rivers glistening like silver roads, villages glowing with firelight, voices rising in song, temples now swallowed by vines, a greatness, forgotten yet alive beneath the canopy, the Amazon not only a wilderness, but a memory, not only a myth but a history, and in its silence, the echo of El Dorado eternal. In the centuries when maps began to fill with the outlines of continents, when science measured the stars and empires carved borders upon the earth, El Dorado slipped gracefully from geography into imagination, from the jungles of South America into the hearts of poets, painters, and storytellers, who seized upon the Golden City not as a place to be conquered but as a symbol of longing, of desire, of the unreachable. And thus El Dorado was reborn in literature, poetry, and art as something greater than walls of gold. It became the mirror of the human soul's endless search for more. Imagine the flicker of candlelight in a European study, a poet bent over parchment, his quill scratching verses that speak of a land bathed in gold, not because he believes in rivers of treasure but because he sees in the myth a metaphor for all that humankind pursues but can never hold. To Edmund Spencer, El Dorado became the green world of faerie, a place of magic and unreachable perfection. To Edgar Allan Poe, centuries later, it became the haunting symbol of a knight who rides, forever in search of a land he cannot find, his quest eternal, his longing undimmed, his death overshadowed by the promise of a city that exists only in dream. The word itself, El Dorado, slipped into languages as a synonym for paradise, for utopia, for the goal forever beyond reach. Painters took the myth and painted canvases of golden light, of forests glowing, of lakes shimmering with treasure. Engravers illustrated explorers in canoes, their eyes fixed on distant cities gleaming like suns. Novelists set their tales in jungles alive with mystery, their characters driven mad by the dream of gold. In every form, the myth expanded, transforming from story to symbol, from rumor to metaphor. Imagine a theater lit with torches, an audience watching actors in plumed helmets, their voices echoing as they speak of quests for El Dorado, the crowd gasping at visions of golden kings. Imagine salons in Paris, where philosophers debated whether El Dorado was ever real, while poets declared that it was more powerful as a dream than as a fact. Imagine libraries where chronicles of conquistadors lay beside novels of romance, each page feeding the legend. El Dorado, in art, became not a fixed city but a shifting symbol. For some, it was the embodiment of greed, a warning that those who chase gold are destroyed. For others, it was the symbol of hope, of a better world always just beyond sight. For others still, it was the image of death itself, the final journey into unknown lands where treasure lies not in metal but in peace. The richness of the myth lay in its adaptability. It could be sermon, satire, or song, each generation shaping it anew. Even as explorers returned with maps that showed no golden city, the poets kept it alive, for in imagination, El Dorado could never be disproved. It glowed in the background of countless works, invoked in tales of adventurers, in songs of sailors, in dreams of children. Painters of the Romantic era, wandering through wild landscapes of their own, painted jungles filled with light as if El Dorado shimmered just beyond the canvas. In the 19th century, writers used the myth as metaphor for the futility of empire, for the longing of man to possess what cannot be possessed. And in the 20th, filmmakers would echo it still, sending characters into jungles, filling screens with golden light, always reminding us that the city lies not in the forest but in the human heart. To see El Dorado in art is to see ourselves, our hunger for perfection, our endless journeys toward horizons we cannot reach, our fascination with mystery. To hear it in poetry is to hear the whisper that all quests are endless, that the dream itself is the treasure. To read it in novels is to live the tension between greed and hope, between destruction and wonder. And always, the city shines, not upon the map but upon the mind, and as you drift into rest, let this vision cradle you. The poet's quill scratching beneath candlelight, the painter's brush sweeping gold across canvas, the actor's voice echoing in a theater, the philosopher's debate in a Paris salon, the night riding forever in Poe's haunting lines, the word El Dorado shimmering like a star upon the page, no longer a place of conquest but a dream of longing, eternal, unreachable, yet always alive in art, in literature, in imagination, the golden city that glows not in forest but in soul. In the golden shimmer of its name, El Dorado has always promised abundance, but beneath that promise lies the darker shadow of human longing, for it is not only a city of dream but a mirror of greed, a reflection of our endless desire for more. And in this reflection the myth becomes warning, its brilliance hiding ruin, its glow revealing the cost of hunger that cannot be satisfied. Imagine the conquistadors, armored and proud, marching into jungles with crosses raised and banners high, believing themselves chosen to claim what was never theirs. Their hunger was not for survival but for endless wealth, for crowns heavier with jewels, for palaces brighter with gold. Each rumor they heard they twisted into proof, each whisper of ritual they transformed into promises of treasure. And so they marched deeper, consuming lives, spilling blood, enslaving those they met, tearing offerings from temples, prying ornaments from bodies, until their lust blinded them, until their armies crumbled, not from arrows but from their own insatiable need. El Dorado became their curse, pulling them onward even as disease thinned their ranks, even as betrayal splintered their bonds, even as hunger turned them savage. In their greed, they saw the forest not as home but as obstacle, the river not as spirit but as road, the people not as kin but as tools. And in that blindness, the jungle answered with silence and death. Yet this darkness is not bound to the past, for every age has its El Dorado, its dream of endless wealth, its hunger for more than the world can bear. In the colonial centuries, it was silver and sugar, tobacco and slaves, empires devouring continents in pursuit of gold. In the modern age, it becomes oil, rubber, minerals, forests cut and burned, rivers dammed and poisoned, all in pursuit of treasure that glitters but does not satisfy. The myth lives on in corporations, in industries, in the endless markets of today, where El Dorado is no longer a city hidden in jungle but a promise whispered by prophets, by advertisements, by economies that devour the earth. And always, the same truth echoes. Greed is a hunger without end, a thirst that consumes until there is nothing left to drink. Imagine the tribes who once told stories of gold as sacred, as offering, watching as outsiders turned that sacredness into lust, their own lands stripped, their own lives broken. Imagine rivers blackened by oil, forests felled for timber, earth scarred for mines, all pursued with the same fever that once drove conquistadors into swamps. The dream of El Dorado has always been both light and shadow, both hope and curse, both the fire that inspires and the fire that destroys. In art and literature, it became a symbol of longing. In history, it became a symbol of greed. Its lesson is written not in golden walls, but in ruins, in graves, in forests, gone silent. Yet to see this darkness is also to glimpse truth, that desire without balance is destruction, that wealth without reverence is emptiness. For what did those who sought El Dorado truly find? Bones in swamps, wrecked rafts upon rivers, madness in green silence, crowns that rusted, kingdoms that fell. The myth remains eternal, not because it was found, but because it was never satisfied. And perhaps that is its deepest meaning, that El Dorado is the hunger itself, the shadow within us all, the endless reaching for more, the refusal to see treasure in what we already have. To meditate upon this darkness is to understand that the true city of gold is not built of metal but of balance, of reverence, of harmony, and that when we chase shadows of glitter, we lose the light that is real. And as you drift into rest, let this vision cradle you. The conquistadors staggering through forest, their eyes burning with hunger, the rivers reflecting not gold but blood, the forests watching in silence, the modern world repeating the same pursuit in different forms. The word El Dorado shimmering as both dream and curse, a symbol not only of paradise but of desire unbound, reminding us always that the brightest myths cast the darkest shadows, and that to seek endlessly for gold is to risk being consumed by the darkness of our own hunger. In the 20th and 21st centuries, when satellites circle the globe and every ocean seems mapped, when machines can pierce mountains and measure stars, one might think that the dream of El Dorado would finally be laid to rest, exposed as fantasy, dissolved into legend. But instead, it lingers still, alive in the minds of explorers, archaeologists, adventurers, and storytellers who continue to ask if perhaps, hidden beneath the canopy of the Amazon, or buried beneath centuries of soil, there may yet be truths within the myth. Traces of cities, forgotten, echoes of civilizations erased, fragments of a golden dream still waiting to be uncovered. Imagine a team of archaeologists standing in the heat of a clearing, their hands brushing soil away from fragments of pottery painted with intricate designs, shards that whisper of a culture both rich and complex. They measure earthworks, geometric circles, plazas, ditches that stretch wider than cathedrals, carved not by chance, but by human order, revealed by satellites scanning the canopy. Their patterns too vast to see from the ground. These discoveries, found across the Amazon basin, suggest that millions once lived here, their settlements linked by roads and rivers, their lives balanced with the forest, their abundance real though forgotten. To hold a shard of pottery is to hold a piece of a vanished world, a fragment of El Dorado, perhaps not in gold but in knowledge, in culture, in human brilliance. Imagine modern explorers trekking into the Guyana highlands, retracing the steps of Raleigh, searching not for shining temples but for evidence of thriving societies, their cameras capturing landscapes so remote they feel untouched, their notebooks filled with stories still told by local tribes, stories that echo the old myths. Some return with photographs of ruins swallowed by vines, terraces hidden in mountains, petroglyphs carved upon stone faces gazing over rivers. Others return with nothing but silence and memory, yet even silence fuels the dream. The jungle still hides more than it reveals, its vastness swallowing roads, temples, entire civilizations, erasing them so thoroughly that only hints remain. And so the modern search continues, not only with boots upon soil but with eyes in the sky. Satellites scan for straight lines beneath canopy, for rectangular patterns in earth, for soil darker than its surroundings, where humans once cultivated. LiDAR, a technology that cuts through forest cover with laser pulses, reveals networks of settlements across Amazonia, villages linked in great arcs, cities larger than once believed possible, proving that the forest was not an untouched wilderness, but a living tapestry of human and natural design. Each discovery shifts our understanding, turning El Dorado from myth into metaphor for these forgotten cities. Perhaps the Golden City never existed as walls of metal, but perhaps it existed as networks of abundance, Societies rich, not in bullion but in balance, their memory retold as shimmering kingdoms. Imagine modern adventurers in inflatable rafts, drifting down tributaries of the Amazon, listening to local guides tell of hidden places where stone walls peek from beneath vines, where rivers conceal carved steps, where gold ornaments have been found by fishermen. Some of these tales prove true, others dissolve like mist. All of them keep the myth alive. Even today, treasure hunters dig near Lake Guatavita, convinced that the offerings of the Muisca still lie in its depths. Though centuries of attempts have yielded little more than fragments, the lake resists them still, holding its silence, reminding us that some treasures are not meant to be taken. And yet, the pursuit continues, for to seek El Dorado is no longer only to seek gold but to seek connection, to uncover history, to find meaning in the forest's silence. Modern scholars argue that the true El Dorado is the story itself, mirror of human longing, a lesson in the cost of greed, a symbol of cultures lost but not forgotten. But still, in quiet hearts, the question flickers. What if somewhere in the vast green ocean of trees there lies a city yet unseen, a place where gold gleams beneath roots, where temples rise still, where the dream is not only memory but reality? That question fuels expeditions still, in documentaries, in scientific journals, in whispered plans of adventurers. And perhaps that is why El Dorado endures, because it is not about what we find but about what we seek, about the longing that drives us into unknowns, about the hunger for wonder. The jungle still guards its mysteries, and humanity still listens for whispers. And as you drift into rest, let this vision cradle you, archaeologists brushing dust from ancient shards, satellites mapping hidden circles in the canopy, rivers glistening beneath sun, adventurers drifting in rafts with hope in their eyes, the Lake of Guatavita gleaming silent in the highlands, the forest humming eternal, its secrets still hidden, the myth alive still, the search unfinished, the golden dream of El Dorado, flowing onward like the rivers themselves, endless, elusive, eternal. In the modern world, where skyscrapers rise higher than temples and screens glow brighter than fires, El Dorado has not faded but has found new life in stories, in songs, in films, in games, in the very imagination of humanity, reborn not as a place of maps but as a symbol carried in culture, retold to each generation in new voices, each shaping it to their desires, their fears, their hopes. Imagine a cinema darkened, the audience silent, the screen glowing with images of jungles alive with mystery, explorers in battered hats stepping into green shadows, golden cities shimmering in the distance, music swelling as danger and wonder intertwine. Films across the 20th and 21st centuries have returned again and again to the myth, sometimes telling of conquistadors driven mad, sometimes of adventurers with humor and courage, sometimes of animated heroes who stumble into kingdoms that blend magic and memory. The word El Dorado itself has become a shorthand for adventure, for treasure just out of reach, for quests both perilous and irresistible. In literature, the story endures still. Novels weave it into thrillers. Scholars reinterpret it as allegory, poets invoke it as symbol. In popular songs, musicians sing of El Dorado as the road of longing, as the dream of success, as the place that glows but cannot be attained. In games, it becomes a world to explore, a treasure to win, a challenge to overcome. Even in casual speech, when someone calls a place an El Dorado, they mean a paradise of abundance, a promise of opportunity, the dream of more. Yet beneath these modern retellings lies the same duality, light and shadow, hope and greed. Films show not only golden temples but the madness of those who pursue them, reminding us of the conquistadors who perished in the forests, of the betrayal and ruin that followed their lust. Books explore the metaphor, reminding us that El Dorado is not only treasure but temptation. Songs carry the longing, turning the golden city into a symbol of love, of ambition, of endless pursuit. Imagine a child watching a film about explorers and feeling their heart ignite with wonder, dreaming of jungles, of hidden cities, of mysteries waiting. Imagine an artist painting canvases of forests glowing with light, their brush capturing not geography but imagination. Imagine a storyteller bending over a microphone, their voice soothing as they retell the myth for a modern audience, weaving history and legend into bedtime.com. The myth endures because it adapts, because it is never fixed, because it is not only about gold but about the human condition itself, the endless reaching for more. the endless dreaming of beyond. In popular culture, El Dorado becomes what each generation needs it to be. For some, it is comedy. For others, cautionary tale. For others, inspiration. The city shifts as it always has, moving not across maps but across mediums, from jungle to page to screen, never still, never gone. And always, it glows, shimmering at the edge of imagination, promising more than the world can give, whispering to us that perhaps, just perhaps, it waits still. To see El Dorado in cinema is to see our hunger for wonder. To hear it in music is to feel our longing for light. To read it in novels is to touch our fear of greed. And as you drift into rest, let this vision cradle you. The flickering screen in a darkened theater, the pages of a book glowing under lamplight, the voice of a singer carrying the word El Dorado like a spell, the laughter of children playing games of hidden treasure, the myth shimmering not in jungles but in culture. Alive still, endless, eternal, a golden city that glows in every story we tell, in the quiet hours when the world grows still and the clamor of conquest fades into memory. El Dorado lingers not as a city in jungle or as treasure beneath a lake, but as philosophy, as a question woven into the human spirit. What do we seek? When we dream of gold, when we imagine lands of endless abundance, when we chase horizons that recede no matter how far we walk, the myth becomes mirror, showing us not geography but desire, not maps but meaning. Imagine philosophers sitting beneath oil lamps, their eyes gazing into the distance as they ponder what El Dorado truly is, whether it is a place at all, or whether it is the hunger within us, the spark that drives us to explore, to create, to long for more than what is. To some, El Dorado is the symbol of human striving, proof that we are never content, that the soul always yearns for something beyond reach, and that this yearning is both our curse and our gift. For without it, we would not journey, we would not invent, we would not imagine. To others, El Dorado is warning, a parable of endless desire that consumes itself, showing us that the more we chase external wealth, the further we drift from inner peace. The city of gold becomes the city of the self, its walls not built of metal but of understanding, its treasure not coins but clarity. Imagine a seeker sitting in meditation, their breath slow, their eyes closed, imagining El Dorado not as a place to conquer but as a state to attain, a harmony where longing falls away, where the soul finds enough. The legend of El Dorado thus transforms into inner journey, from greed to wisdom, from search outward to search inward. Philosophers across ages have drawn upon it. Some compare it to Plato's Atlantis, not as place but as metaphor for perfection lost. Others liken it to Shangri-La, to the kingdom of heaven, to any dream of paradise that reflects not land but longing. In this sense, El Dorado becomes universal, no longer tied to Amazon or Andes but to the human heart. And so the city of gold becomes the city of meaning, the city of purpose, the city of the inner light. Imagine a traveler who has spent years in search of treasure, weary, broken, finally realizing that the true El Dorado was never hidden in forests but always within, that the golden city is the spark of kindness, the glow of wisdom, the treasure of love. This transformation makes the myth eternal, for even when jungles yield no city, the human soul continues to carry it, continues to seek. The question remains, should we always seek? Is longing itself the point, or is peace found only in its end? El Dorado becomes the riddle. To some, it says, keep searching, for it is the journey that makes us human. To others, it whispers, let go, for the treasure is already within you. Both truths may live together, as paradoxes often do. And as centuries pass, the myth evolves, yet always remains, shimmering not on maps but in minds. To see El Dorado as philosophy is to see ourselves reflected, our endless striving, our endless dreaming, our endless asking, what lies beyond, what waits within. And as you drift into rest, let this vision cradle you. Philosophers writing by lamplight, monks meditating in silence, poets whispering verses of unreachable lands, travelers sitting quietly at last, realizing the road inward is the true quest. The golden city gleams still, not upon rivers or beneath lakes, but in the chambers of the heart, in the questions of the soul, eternal, elusive, alive, reminding us always that the greatest journey is not to find El Dorado, but to understand what it truly means. In the heart of the Amazon, in the valleys of the Andes, in the high plateaus of Colombia where the wind carries ancient songs, The memory of El Dorado has never belonged to conquistadors, nor to poets or philosophers alone, but to the people, whose ancestors shaped the rituals, built the earthworks, and whispered the stories long before outsiders arrived. For it is in indigenous voices that the legend still breathes with meaning, alive not as myth of greed, but as heritage of sacredness, of ritual, of connection to the land. Imagine an elder sitting by a fire, his face lined with years, telling children the story of a king covered in gold dust, not as fable of wealth, but as tale of offering, of harmony, of devotion to spirits that live in lake and mountain. To him, the story is not about treasure but about balance, about how people must give as much as they take, about how gold itself is not for hoarding but for honoring. Imagine the Muisca people gathering by Lake Guatavita, their priests chanting as a ruler enters waters shimmering with sunlight, his body aglow with sacred dust, casting offerings of gold and emerald into depths not for profit but for prayer. This is the origin of El Dorado, the memory preserved not in books but in blood, carried through generations despite conquest, despite silence forced upon them. To the Muisca, El Dorado was not a city but a ceremony, not greed but gift, not empire but equilibrium, and even today, their descendants remember their festivals retelling the ritual in dance and song, reminding the world that what conquistadors saw as treasure was in truth devotion. In the forests, other tribes tell their own versions, some of cities shimmering in the distance, others of kings who led with generosity, others of lands where abundance flowed because people lived in respect with nature. These are not myths of greed but of guidance, teachings to show how humans and earth must live together. Yet these voices were twisted by outsiders into promises of gold, their meaning shattered, their rituals stolen. Even so, the stories survived, woven into chants, preserved in weaving patterns, whispered in sacred gatherings. Imagine sitting with the Yanomami, hearing their shamans speak of spirit worlds shining with light, worlds outsiders might call El Dorado but which they know as realms of ancestors, not places of gold but of wisdom. Imagine the Ashaninka speaking of rivers where the sacred lives, where abundance comes not from conquest but from care. Imagine the Shipibo Canibo singing Icaros that map invisible cities of the spirit, cities outsiders could never see, yet which shimmer brighter than any treasure. To hear these voices is to understand that El Dorado was never singular, never fixed, but always alive in memory, shifting from tribe to tribe, meaning different truths, yet sharing the same essence, abundance as balance, gold as sacred, wealth as harmony. Scholars write of geoglyphs, of pottery, of artifacts, but the people still write in song, in ritual, in silence, carrying truths that cannot be measured by excavation alone. And in this lies the deepest irony, that the world spent centuries searching forests and draining lakes, while the true El Dorado was always alive in stories, always present in voices that were silenced yet not destroyed. To listen now is to rediscover the myth anew, not as greed but as guidance, not as fantasy but as philosophy rooted in earth. Perhaps the Golden City is not lost but alive in every ceremony where offerings are cast into water, in every song sung to forest spirits, in every child who learns the story by firelight. And as you drift into rest, let this vision cradle you. Elders whispering beneath stars, children listening with eyes wide, drums echoing through valleys, lakes shimmering with devotion, voices carrying the memory of El Dorado not as conquest, but as sacredness, not as ruin, but as survival, reminding us that the Golden City was never meant to be taken, it was always meant to be remembered. In the quiet glow of evening, as rivers glisten beneath fading sun and the forests hum with the chorus of unseen lives, the story of El Dorado comes to rest, not with the clatter of conquest, nor with the cry of discovery, but with a whisper that stretches across centuries, reminding us that the Golden City was never a place alone, but a mirror of the human soul, a dream that endures in every age, in every voice, in every imagination. The conquistadors marched into the jungles, seeking walls of treasure, yet found only silence and death. The explorers of science traced rivers, measured mountains, and uncovered fragments of civilizations lost, yet the Golden City remained just out of reach. The poets turned it into metaphor, the artists into symbol, the philosophers into riddle, and still the name glowed, shimmering not upon maps but in minds. The indigenous remembered it not as greed but as gift, as ritual, as sacredness, and their voices carry its truest meaning still. Through it all, El Dorado has lived, shifting, adapting, surviving conquest, surviving doubt, surviving centuries. Perhaps that is its greatest treasure, not gold, not walls, not jewels, but its endurance, its immortality, its power to inspire wonder, to spark longing, to make us ask what it is we truly seek. Imagine the river flowing endlessly, its currents carrying not treasure but memory, whispering of kings covered in gold dust, of ceremonies by sacred lakes, of civilizations thriving in harmony with forests. Imagine the night sky glowing with stars, each one a spark of longing, each one an El Dorado shining just beyond reach. Imagine a child hearing the story for the first time, their eyes widening with awe, not at the promise of wealth, but at the mystery of the unknown. This is the true city of gold, the dream itself, the longing that never dies, the fire that keeps us walking forward, searching, creating, imagining. For in every age, El Dorado appears anew, to the conquistador as kingdom of riches, to the poet as land of longing, to the philosopher as question of meaning, to the indigenous as sacred balance, to the modern explorer as trace of lost civilizations, to the artist as light upon canvas, to the dreamer as spark of hope. And so the city is eternal, not because it exists upon earth but because it exists within us. To chase it is to be human, to dream it is to be alive. And yet, its deepest lesson is also this, that perhaps the city has always been here, that paradise is not beyond the horizon, but in the harmony we create, in the reverence we give, in the love we share. To find El Dorado, then, is not to seize, but to see, not to take, but to remember. And as the story closes, let the vision cradle you, forests vast and eternal, rivers shimmering like silver veins, stars glowing like scattered gold upon the night, voices of elders whispering tales by firelight, explorers bending over maps, poets writing by candle, artists brushing strokes of golden light, and you, here, listening, dreaming, carried gently by the truth that the city of gold is not lost, nor found, but eternal, a dream that lives in every soul, a light that will never fade. Sleep now in its glow, and let the golden city guide you into rest. For El Dorado is not a place to conquer, it is the dream that waits within, forever shining, forever calling, forever yours. In the hush of eternity, when rivers no longer rush, and jungles stand silent beneath the stars, the story of El Dorado whispers, still, echoing not as conquest nor as treasure but as song, as memory, as dream that no age could erase, a dream carried from one generation to the next, reshaped with each telling, alive in every tongue, alive in every heart. The conquistadors are gone, their armor rusting in forgotten swamps, their banners eaten by time, their greed dissolved into dust. Yet the golden city they sought still glimmers not upon maps, but within minds, not as walls of gold, but as a light that never dies. The explorers of science have passed too, their notebooks filled with sketches of rivers and stars, their voices silenced by years, yet their wonder breathes in every discovery of geoglyph and shard, in every satellite image that reveals forgotten cities beneath the canopy. The poets have long since laid down their quills, their candle flames extinguished, yet their words endure, carrying El Dorado into realms of metaphor, into lands of longing, into dreams that shimmer far beyond the reach of time. And the people, the true keepers of the tale, the Muska, the tribes of the Amazon, the elders by the fire still hold it, still whisper it, still breathe it into children's ears, keeping alive its sacred meaning, its heart of offering, its lesson of balance. For El Dorado was never only a city, it was always a reflection of what we seek, of what we fear, of what we love, of what we long to become. It is greed and gift, shadow and light, hunger and harmony, always both, always eternal. Imagine the earth itself holding the memory, the rivers carrying whispers of gold, the forests cradling the silence of vanished cities, the sky keeping watch as humans chase dreams again and again. Imagine centuries from now, when future travelers sail not upon rivers but among stars, carrying the myth with them, searching for new worlds, whispering of El Dorado not in jungle but in galaxy, still longing, still dreaming, still seeking a city of light beyond reach. For the legend is not bound to place, it belongs to humanity itself, as eternal as fire, as endless as night, as luminous as hope. And so the story closes not with discovery, not with finality, but with continuation, with the promise that as long as hearts beat, El Dorado will live, shimmering just beyond the horizon, calling, beckoning, reminding us always that the truest treasure is not in gold, nor in conquest, but in wonder, in journey, in the dream itself. And as you drift into rest, let this final vision cradle you, rivers shining like liquid stars, forests breathing in endless silence, children listening by firelight, poets whispering lines by candle, explorers gazing at maps, and in the far distance, beyond earth, beyond time, the golden city glowing still, eternal, untouchable, yet forever alive in the human soul, the dream of El Dorado, the dream without end.
you.